All right. Looks like we are live. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I'm a couple minutes late there. I was trying to get my act together, as usual. uh, I hope you're doing well. Look, I was debating what to talk about today. There's a lot of news we could talk about from the war in Israel, but honestly, the war in Israel will be there tomorrow. There's a lot we could talk about the war in Ukraine, and there are increasing attacks or drone incursions, let's say, by Russia into NATO countries. Romania saw Russian drones over the weekend. But the war in Ukraine it's been going on for almost 4 years. It's going to be there tomorrow too. I decided that what we really need to talk about is that there is a lot more going on with this shooting of Charlie Kirk and the effect that it's having on America, not just the investigation into the shooting, which we'll talk about some, but the effect that it's having on people and how God is using this terrible tragedy. I mean, because it's a tragedy. My friend Victor Marks is very close with Charlie Kirk's family. He was Charlie Kirk's mentor, and he jumped on a plane and went right to Erica's side, the Charlie Kirk's wife, after he heard what happened. And I've been communicating with Victor uh, for over the weekend about this, and you know, a a mother and two beautiful children were just deprived of their husband and father forever, just because of the hatred that one man held, and not just one man. It appears that there may have been more people who knew about this before it happened. So first, let's talk about that. The president said in a news conference, or if they gave from the Oval Office, that the FBI is looking into whether or not some of these left wing organizations had previous knowledge of the shooting, and not just that, but whether or not they uh, facilitated, encouraged, and pushed this shooter. Again, I don't. I'm not going to talk about his name. I don't think that we should repeat the names of these homicidal maniacs because we don't want to give them any more publicity than they already have. It certainly is true, without a doubt, especially in my mind. I mean, having covered Antifa and a lot of these protest organizations throughout my career, there's no doubt in my mind that they've been building up to this, that they've been uh, encouraging political violence, wanting it to happen, training to make it happen for some time. There's a organization that is being looked into by the FBI now called the Armed Queers SLC. SLC stands for Salt Lake City. And the Armed Queers SLC uh, has taken down a bunch of their social media posts since the shooting happened. But those that are still up, I went and looked at their Twitter page, and they've got photographs of themselves uh, locked and loaded, carrying weapons, standing out in front of drag shows for children. And I'm as I am the one of the strongest Second Amendment advocates you could ever find, and I would not advocate for taking the guns away from any law-abiding U.S. citizen. However, if they are mentally ill, it might be a good idea to take a look at that and figure out how best to uh, deal with that situation. It's a dangerous, slippery slope because if you start passing laws that all we have to do is declare somebody to be mentally unfit and we can take their guns away, they're called red flag laws. Well, then the question becomes who declares somebody to be mentally unfit? Because the Biden administration would have said that if you're a Bible believing conservative American, then you're mentally unfit. And so, again, the very slippery slope. I think the better answer is to encourage lots more good, law abiding, sane, moral people to get trained and equipped to make their societies and their communities safer wherever they go and let that function as a deterrent. And that, in order to preserve the Second Amendment and not fall into the trap of saying that the only way to make us safer is to make us all more vulnerable. The only way to do that is to stand up, as my friend Tim Miller said yesterday in the live that we did here at the lodge. Stand up, train up, and get prayed up. Do something to make your community safer. One of the ways you do that is by praying. One of the ways you do that is by training and preparing, and by being willing to take on that mantle of responsibility of being a protector. And I want to talk today mostly about uh, our parenting, because honestly, this shooter did not come to the point where he was. I mean, I've talked about this a lot, but it still just boggles my mind. You got a 22-year-old, and I call him a kid because I was a kid when I was 22. Some people say, you shouldn't call him a kid. He's a man. Yeah, well, okay, whatever. You got a 22-year-old person who literally just decided that it was so important to shut up Charlie Kirk, a guy who went around to college campuses and advocated for the kinds of things that would have been considered common sense up until about 15 minutes ago. Things like the importance of family and the importance of training our children to be good, sane, moral people. He advocated for those wildly extremist views that uh, men are men and women are women, and we shouldn't confuse the two. This guy decided that it was so important to shut him up that he was willing to throw his entire life away in order to do that. He'll likely get the death penalty. And I think he probably thought about that. He must have considered the fact that he probably wouldn't live through this. And I just keep asking myself, like, what other than, I mean, obviously we know there had to be some demonic influence here. But other than that, what are the logical steps that led this kid to that conclusion? From all appearances, he grew up in a typical American home. Dad was a sheriff's deputy. They were conservative Republicans, and they raised their kid pretty much like most kids in America are being raised today. And therein lies the problem, because when we drill down and we look at what exactly his upbringing looked like, I think we can say with pretty clear certainty that this guy's family is not without blame for how he turned out. Now, they did their best, and we all do our best. And I've always said, you shouldn't criticize other people's parenting, because everybody gets to ruin their kids however they want. I mean, it's a free country. You can raise your kids how you want to. But I think there are some things that are coming to the forefront, coming to light in our society, that we need to think more closely about. And I think this event is causing us to think more intentionally about what kind of lives we're giving our kids. What are we doing to our children? So I want to talk about that. Now, first of all, just to explain, according to the reports that I've seen, the shooter's family allowed him to have a computer in his room from a very young age. There's a photograph floating around of him at like age 10 in his room on gaming on his computer. Okay. Now, I can virtually guarantee you that gaming was not the only thing he was doing on that computer in his bedroom by himself. The statistics that we see say that 73% of US teenagers have consumed pornography, more than half of which started before the age of 13 years old. Early exposure to pornography is linked to permissive sexual attitudes, earlier sexual activity, higher risk behaviors. That's code for homosexual behaviors, and even sexual aggression. Porn use is shaping kids' identities and morality at the most vulnerable stages of their development. You're going to have to excuse me. My throat is pretty wiped out for some reason. I'm starting to get a cold, I think. So my voice is kind of wrecked. But on top of the early consumption of pornography by most kids, I mean, I heard a guy say there are two kinds of young men in America: those who consume pornography and those who lie about it. When we say 73% of US teens have consumed pornography, that includes women, that includes females. So the numbers for young men are much higher than 73%, because it's skewed down by the relatively small percentage of females who consume pornography, because women don't get turned on that way, right? For the most part. So, on top of that very toxic uh, statistic is the fact that an even larger number of teenagers, 85% overall, and a much almost 99% of men, 85% of teens, play video games about 41% of teenagers play every day. The World Health Organization has come out and announced that there's a disorder. They're calling it a disorder and diagnosing people who play an inordinate amount of video games, which is a lot. I mean, a large percentage of young people. They're calling it a gaming disorder. Heavy gaming is tied to depression, anxiety, loneliness, disrupted sleep. Many video games that young men play are violent and they correlate with increased aggression, reduced empathy, and honestly, what they do is they give young men an outlet for that drive to build and conquer and overcome and compete, which are all hardwired things that typically would cause a man to go out and get a job, to go out and try to make his way in the world, make some money, do the things that would lead to winning in life. And he gets that desire satiated by sitting and playing on a video game. Now, I don't think, because most of the people who watch my show are 65 or over, and I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much for doing that, folks. Please make sure you hit the like button, by the way. This is your reminder to hit the like button. If you like this kind of content and want more of it, just go boop, boop, just hit the button. And that tells YouTube to show this to more people. Also, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I'm very interested to see how many people are coming in from outside the United States as opposed to in the United States, because what we're seeing is that this assassination of Charlie Kirk is having ripple effects all around the world. As a matter of fact, Charlie was supposed to go to Armenia in November to speak at a prayer conference there that was being organized by my friend, and so I was thinking about going myself to that thing. Obviously, Charlie Kirk is having a real impact across the board, not just in the United States. We saw massive protests in the UK over the weekend. The news said it was 100 to 150,000 people. The aerial photos looked like 1 million or more. And there were a lot of signs praising Charlie Kirk at that protest. So this is having an effect around the world. And I'm going to talk more about that effect in just a minute and what it's doing in our hearts. But let's talk more about our parenting. See, it has become very common in America and other places around the world for us to discourage our children from going outside. I know that in the UK, for example, I've seen they act like it's so dangerous for kids to be outside that I've seen playgrounds and like school playgrounds where when the kids go outside, they have to wear a yellow road guard vest to make them more visible, just so they don't get run over or something. This is the crazy health and safety stuff that they have in the UK, which is, don't get me started on that. It's a whole nother podcast. But there's a city in Colorado that I wrote about in one of my books that passed a city ordinance that children cannot play outside unsupervised under the age of 16. 16 years old. I mean, when I was 8 years old, I would ride my bike to church, which was about 8 miles away from our house, all by myself. I rode all over town. I went hiking in the mountains by myself as a 9, 10, 11, 12-year old. And you've got cities in America who are saying that it's inappropriate for children to play outside unsupervised, even in their own front yard, under the age of 16. Are you kidding me? That's insane. So what has transpired in our culture is that we've felt like what we really need to do, because gosh, if we let them go outside, they might get snatched, they might get run over, who knows what'll happen, somebody might try to sell them drugs. So we just tell them, just go sit on the couch and play your video games. And we treat our kids like pets. We don't give them much work to do, so they don't feel very useful. And we sort of teach them that their only purpose in life is to be entertained. What's the first thing you ask your kid when he gets home from going out, to school or whatever? Did you have fun? Was it fun? Did you have fun? What we're doing is subtly training our kids to live a meaningless existence. And if there's one thing that studies have shown, it's that when you live in a wealthy, safe society, there is a corresponding rise in a sense of meaninglessness in people's lives, because we tend to turn inward. We tend to be all about our own comfort, safety, and in so doing, we avoid taking the kinds of risks that once gave life meaning for our ancestors. Thank you for that. Cindy, I will try to remember to lead us in prayer at the end of the live. And VP Art, pray for your 24-year-old son. Tell us his name, please. And I'll try to pray for him when we pray at the end. Thank you for those donations. I appreciate those. So what happens is we allow our children to spend an inordinate amount of time in front of a screen. This starts at a very, very young age. And I get it. I understand. I've got grandkids and they're crazy and they're high energy and run around and into everything. And sometimes you just get exasperated, and it's just like the only thing that will get my kid to sit still is if I turn on the magic talking box and plunk them down in front of that box and let them veg out for a little bit. So from a very early age, we are resorting to screen time to give ourselves a little moment of sanity. Well, what did parents do before we had the screens, before we had the internet, before we had television? Because they had the same problem. Mothers were harried and exasperated before there was internet and video games and television. So what did they do? You know what they did? They sent their kids outside. They said, leave and don't come home until it gets dark. When you see the street lights come on, that's your cue to come back home. And then we'll get you cleaned up, bandaged up, and we'll give you a hug and put you to bed, give you some dinner. And in the meantime, mom gets a little uninterrupted time to take care of the house, do whatever she needs to do. So why can't we go back to that? Is it really as dangerous as the world makes it out to be to send your kids outside? And actually, if you look at the statistics, it's not. It's not as dangerous as it was when I was a kid to let your kids go play outside. Statistically, your children are less likely to be victimized today than they were back in the 1980s. Part of that is because we don't let our kids go outside anymore. But we should. There are studies that show that the average distance that a young boy in America travels from his home has been cut dramatically to when my father's generation, it was like 5 miles from home. My generation, the average daily variance or movement from home as young people played was about 1 mile from home. Today, it's about 300 feet. That's it. And that's just simply because we won't let our kids go outside. So we somehow have gotten to the point where we feel like it's doing a service to our children to buy them a video game console, to let them set up a television in their room or a computer in their room and play video games. And it's not. It is incredible. The loneliness and isolation that young people, young men especially, feel ends up pushing them into online communities. They try to seek community online. Many of the forums that they run into foster bitterness and entitlement and rage and misogyny. That's this incel culture that I keep talking about. Incel stands for involuntary celibates. The crazy thing is, we were just talking about this yesterday with a guy at church. You know, when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot more illicit sexual activity going on, even with the young people in our churches, than there is today. And you might say, well, gosh, that's great that our children have become so much more moral now than they were before. Not so much. That's not really the reason. The reason is because young people don't feel the impetus to go out and seek out sexual contact in the real world because they're doing it virtually. And they're just happy with that. That's not a good thing. I mean, obviously, we don't want our children out being promiscuous in the real world, but having them instead be promiscuous in the virtual world is not that much better. It might reduce the number of unplanned pregnancies and STDs, but it certainly is not healthy for our society. So when you couple the pornography and the gaming together, what you get is a violently toxic mix, a, a violently toxic recipe for disengagement from the world, anger, free floating frustration, meaninglessness, and all of those things turn into rage. They create rage in these young men. And that's why so many of the mass shootings and active violence events that we've seen over the past few years have been related to incel men or violence that comes with other factions of incel men like transgenders and things like that. As I've said, I think transgenderism is a extremist facet of the incel movement. I can't get a girlfriend, so I'm just going to become a girl. That kind of thing. And this is so pervasive. I mean, people have no idea. I want to play for you because, again, since most of the people who watch me are older, you probably don't play these games yourself. And so you probably have no idea just how incredibly violent they are. And so I want to play for you. Let's see if this. Yeah. This is just a quick. This is a look at Grand Theft Auto, and basically what you're watching here is, just a snippet, just a very small snippet of what these games are like. I'm going to play it for you again because I want you to see this. And look, this is just some of the more tame stuff that I can actually show you. There's a tremendous amount of gore. There's a tremendous amount of sexual violence. There's a real melding of pornography and video games into these games. This particular game is Grand Theft Auto, which has sold more than $8 billion worth of games. Hundreds of millions of people, almost a half a billion people worldwide play Grand Theft Auto. And this is some of the more tame stuff that I can show you, but all you're looking at is virtual felonies over and over again. They're running people over on the beach. They are stealing vehicles. They're running from the cops, shooting at the cops. Okay. I mean, it is just chaos. And that's what they call entertainment. Now, when I was a kid, people used to wring their hands about violent movies that modeled that kind of violent behavior, but we've moved beyond movies to first person games that you can actually control and do it yourself. And again, this is just the very tame stuff that I can actually show you on YouTube. To if you go look at some of the stuff that is out there, uh, that shows what's really in these games, it's hypersexual, it's very gory, and it's just how can you look at that and say that that's a healthy pastime for your kid? The problem is most parents, when they think their kids playing video games, they're thinking of the video games we had when I was a kid, which is Pong, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, stuff like that. They had no idea how realistic, hyper realistic these games have become. I mean, the grass is greener, the sky is bluer. We had something like that when I was a kid. It was called playing outside. Kids don't play outside anymore. That's too dangerous. So let's park them in front of a video game that just trains them to commit felonies, that desensitizes them to violent sexual behavior, to violent physical behavior, and think that we're doing something better for them. Well, see, that's what the shooter's family did. It's known that he was an avid gamer, and like I say, I virtually guarantee he was highly involved in pornography. Now, many kids go through a phase where they're exposed to all that stuff, including pornography, and they come out of it. They manage to dodge the bullet and not become a homicidal maniac. So don't. A lot of people will point to that and say, you can't blame this in video games. You can't blame this on pornography because there are lots of kids. 75% of kids are not homicidal maniacs. That's very true. But the fact that some people who smoke will not end up dying of lung cancer does not mean that smoking is safe. And in the same way, with these games being designed, literally scientifically designed to be addictive, why don't we treat video games the same way we treat tobacco? The tobacco industry invested billions of dollars in lobbying Congress not to regulate them, but eventually people woke up and said, no, look, if we live in a free country, you ought to have the freedom to smoke if you want to, but you ought to be well informed of the risks. And so we put mechanisms in place to call out the risks of smoking, and especially to try to stop people from starting smoking at a very young age. Let them get to the point where they're making enough connections in their brain to understand the risks, because young people typically don't understand risk. Their brains aren't wired that way. So let them get to the point where they can understand that risk before they are able to legally start smoking. Why don't we do that with video games? Why don't we put age restrictions on video games? I mean, I guess there are some age restrictions on video games, but they're so easy to get around. I mean, they say that the average, this blows me away, the average gamer in America, of which there are maybe 20 million people playing at any given moment, day or night. The average gamer is 31 years old. 31 years old. Like, by 31, shouldn't you have a family? Shouldn't you have a job? Shouldn't you be like a productive member of society? I I don't understand this. The video game business is one of the largest businesses in the world. Global revenue in 2025 is going to be close to $200 billion just this year. $200 billion. About nearly half of the planet, 3.6 billion people, are active video game players. That's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. So, tobacco companies scientifically optimized nicotine delivery in order to get people who smoke addicted to the nicotine, in order to get them hooked for life. Video game companies do exactly the same thing by engineering loot boxes, microtransactions, daily streaks, and rewards to keep players hooked on playing video games. Now, there's more to it than just porn and video games that lead somebody to become a homicidal maniac. And I think a lot of people will then say, well, it's barking up the wrong tree to call for increased regulation and maybe just increased control. I don't even want to say we need more regulations, because Lord knows we've got enough regulations in this country. What I'd like to say is that we need more parents being involved in their kids' lives, taking the time to give them options, give them stuff to do to make them useful, productive members of society that feel like they have meaning and purpose in their lives. We could put more taxes on the video game industry. Okay, whatever. But I think the bigger problem is that parents are just not involved enough in our kids' lives. Look, I bought a farm and moved to West Virginia because I have 5 little kids and I knew that living in town was not going to be healthy for them. I had 3 boys and they were very high energy. They needed a lot to do. And so I intentionally restructured my life, left the brokerage firm, stopped being a stockbroker, became a writer, and we moved to West Virginia and bought a farm so that my boys would have lots of work to do. And we intentionally did not we wanted to do hay, grow hay every year on our property for our animals. And there's a lot of equipment you can go buy for round bales of hay that is all mechanized. So you can pick them up with a forklift and you can move them around and things like that. We intentionally invested instead in square bale technology that you have to pick up with your hands. Why? Because I wanted my sons to have more work to do. We intentionally installed a outdoor wood furnace to heat our home with wood so that we'd have to go out and split wood every year to give my sons more work to do. We intentionally bought goats and sheep and horses and cows and pigs and chickens and all sorts of animals to put on our farm so that my kids would have purposeful work to do, other things to care for other than just themselves. And my goal was to make it so that they were so worn out at the end of each day that they didn't have time or energy to go get in trouble. And largely, that worked out pretty well for my kids. All my kids are following Jesus. 4 of the 5 are married. And we've got 6 grandchildren. So I feel like I can be proud of that. One of the things that we were very careful about with my kids growing up was controlling their screen time. They were not allowed to have gaming consoles by and large. We didn't even have a television for a long time. We had a TV for a time, and we'd use it to watch movies as a family together. You know, there's a good reason for that. But other than that, we were very careful about making sure that it was so boring in my house that my kids had to go outside to find something to do. And if they made the mistake of telling me they were bored, then I gave them more work to do. But this was in an age before the ubiquitous smartphones, unsupervised internet, endless gaming, TikTok, all that kind of stuff. But let's go on to the third leg of this toxic triad: porn, video games, and public universities. Public universities are designed to take your kids away from you and to turn them into good little Marxists. They have been for a long time. The public university that I attended was certainly geared toward turning people into good little Marxists. And it only took, in the case of the shooter, Charlie Kirk's assassin, it only took 17 months of him going to a public university for him to end up dating a transgender man and throwing all of the morals and values that his parents tried to teach him growing up out the window. So they took him to church as a kid. They tried to teach him to discern good from evil. They tried to give him some good spiritual formation. But then they sent him to a public university, and it unraveled all of that in less than 2 years. Now, that says something about the efficacy of our university system. And I would even just go as so far as to say our public school system as in general, because this stuff has definitely trickled down into the public school system. What I will say is that the shooter, if you look at his life, his fairly idyllic, wealthy upbringing in a moral, God-fearing home, what I see is an advertisement for homeschooling, because this kid was not homeschooled. And I just, after looking at the quality or lack thereof of the teachers that I've met and seen online, both in elementary school, high school, and college, running across so many college professors who are actually celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. What I see in that is an advertisement for homeschooling. Absolutely, positively, we should be encouraging our children to homeschool their children. We should be encouraging our children to keep our grandchildren away from screens as much as possible. If they're going to look at a TV screen, if they're going to look at a computer screen, it should definitely be supervised. And we should work to give them some meaning and purpose in their lives and not treat them like a toy poodle. Just sit on the couch and be safe, comfortable. Don't do anything dangerous. We should be pushing our children to get out into the world and take risks and do dangerous things. Because in reality, that is how we save not only our kids, but America. Now, there are tons of verses in the Bible that talk about how God can take something that the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. John 12:24 says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Psalm 116:15 says, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints." Revelation 14:13 says, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. From now on, yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor and their deeds will follow them." Genesis chapter 50, verse 20 says, "As for you, you meant evil against me." This is Joseph talking to his brothers. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." And of course, the chapter from Romans 8 that says, "And we know all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that we might be the firstborn among many brethren. And those whom he predestined, he called. And those whom he called, he justified. And those whom he justified, he glorified." How what can we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And it goes on and on. So all of that meant to say, this shooter thought that he was shutting up Charlie Kirk. But what he did instead was unleashed a revival that's a groundswell of revival that's taking place in America. I want to just show you a couple of videos here that will bring this point home. This This is a church service in Washington, D.C. They're singing, I Have Decided to Follow Jesus, in memory of Charlie Kirk.
To follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back, no turning back, no turning back, no turning back.
Man, is that heartwarming? What we saw all across America on yesterday, this Sunday, was churches absolutely packed to the gills. I had a friend who is an avid viewer of the podcast, a very close friend, who sent me a photograph of his church just absolutely packed, standing room only. And he said, we actually had to turn people away from church today because there was no more parking left. I mean, we were completely full. And there are people on social media, all over social media, who are saying, I went to church for the first time on Sunday. And I just wanted to show you a small compilation of messages that people put out on social media about the effect that Charlie Kirk had on their lives in death. Many of these people didn't know who Charlie Kirk was until he was murdered. But now they know who he is, and they've been watching his stuff, and they've been motivated to go to church for the first time in their lives. Take a look at this. This is incredible.
So I just went to church for the first time, and I gotta say, I'm like, I don't know if it's because I'm sleep deprived, but like, I'm literally like a nervous wreck. Like, the first thought that came to mind was like, oh my gosh, people are gonna hate me because of how I look like, or because I'm gay. Because I got tattoos, so that's why I wore a long sleeve, because I was like, I'm not like finna show like all my tattoos, because I feel like everyone's gonna look at me and be like, why is she here in the church? Like, but literally when Jesus says, come as you are, he's not joking, because I came as I am.
I didn't know Charlie Kirk, never met that guy before in my life. And something else that I've never done before in my life is believe in God. I'm gonna wear this suit to church. I'm gonna go to church. I'm going to try to be a better father, husband, and leader for my family. They deserve that. My phone fell down. I guess that's the devil trying to mess me up right now. I'm gonna try, y'all. Look at this suit. I look good, bro. My wife made me feel this way. Charlie's made me feel this way.
The more videos I see of Charlie, the more I realize he was basically a perfect example of what a young man should strive to be. And I think that's what they hate the most. He is someone who advocated everyone gets married young and has kids as soon as possible. He completely advocated for people to not participate in hookup culture. The last video I saw of him that inspired me to make this, he was saying, if you want to be the best version of yourself and you want to live the best life that you could possibly live, you can't do what everybody else does. You can't go to the bars every weekend, get blackout drunk every weekend, and hook up with a random stranger every weekend. That is so unfulfilling. And Charlie was literally a perfect representation, bro. He was a hard-working individual. He had a purpose that was bigger than himself. He fought for truth, and he fought evil. He advocated everyone had kids. And I think the thing that the system fears the most is people thinking for themselves, but not only thinking for themselves, but having children that also think for themselves. And I don't want to use Charlie's name for views whatsoever, but I feel so compelled to talk about this because I don't want his death to be for nothing.
But for the very first time yesterday, I grabbed the Bible. I don't know what I'm looking for in the Bible. I don't know why I felt like I needed to grab the Bible. But I grabbed my husband's Bible. And the page that I opened up to was the verse, John 8:32. And it said, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And I feel like that changed me so much.
I gotta tell you, first time going to church, it was actually not bad. Like, I just wish I could have fully like embraced it, because like I'm really tired, as I had previously mentioned. But one of the things that was being talked about the most was obedience. So obedience to the Lord, and aligning your ways with His. And that's something I've been struggling with lately, and I feel like I needed that reminder today. So I'm very glad that I showed up today, despite my circumstances, despite how I feel right now, which I don't feel my best right now, I'm not gonna lie. But God really is doing such great work in me. And
we went to church today. It was the first time in 20 years for me and Devin. It was the first time for our children. After the events of the last week, Devin and I had a lot of talking that was happening between us about the type of life that we want for ourselves and how we want our boys to be. You know, we talk about Charlie Kirk. We talk about a man of God who was not afraid to stand in his convictions in anything. And we are raising 3 boys that will one day be men. And we want those boys to be as strong in their convictions as Charlie Kirk was. And we realized we had been doing a great disservice by not taking them to church and introducing them to faith up until this point. It is because of Charlie Kirk that we went to church today. We got online and we found one that we thought would be a good first try. You know, some of them are hit or miss, so we didn't know if we would like this one or not. We went in and everybody was so warm and welcoming, which was great. Before the service, they led a prayer for Charlie Kirk and for our nation. That one got me. The message today in the service was centered around forgiveness. And I know that a lot of us are trying to find our way there. And so it was a very powerful message to hear today. And here's to new beginnings.
So I get emotional seeing videos like that of people finding God for the first time. Like, what? There's an all-knowing, all-loving God out there that loves me and has a plan for my life. What? Like they're just flabbergasted. What? All these. I went to church and people were warm and welcoming. Like, who would have thought? I mean, I think for those of us who grew up in church, who have been exposed to church, who have lived in the sort of Christian ghetto for our entire lives, it it's kind of like, yes, thank you, Captain Obvious. Of course, people are warm and welcoming at church. That's the point. But it it also just confounds me to hear from parents who say, I've never taken my kid to church. We haven't been to church in 20 years. What have you been doing? I mean, so you have 3 kids. You probably, you love your children ostensibly. Most people do. You love your kids. You want what's best for them. You want them to be good human beings. And you've never taken them to church. It's never occurred to you to take them to church. But yet, I bet they probably have a video game console and they have a computer in their room and they have a smartphone. So you've opened a window to them so that pornography and filth can just flood into their minds. And it didn't occur to you to at least try to offset that a little by taking them to church? Praise God that he's using the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk to draw people back to himself, to draw people to himself for the first time ever. Praise God for that. But, folks, we shouldn't need to have somebody assassinated in cold blood to get us to see the value of belonging to a community of people who believes things like, oh, I don't know, we should love one another. We should forgive one another. We should put other people before ourselves. We should, serve other people. I that's I, I never understand it when I hear people say, oh, I don't go to church because it's just full of a bunch of hypocrites. I'm like, what church have you got to? Are you trying to say that there's human beings in a church? Because beings do tend to be hypocritical. Are you surprised to go to church and find that there are sinners there? That's like being surprised that there are sick people in a hospital. It exists for the sinners. That's what church is there for. And you should never judge Christ by the actions of the people that he's saving. So I don't understand people who say, well, I don't need church. I just stay home and that's my church. I just stay home and listen to some worship music and read my Bible. That's better. I'm not saying you can't have very meaningful times of worship in your home reading your Bible. The most meaningful times of worship I have are walking around on the mountain right out there, but behind me. But there is something very important about belonging to a community of believers. And I'm actually just finishing up a book about that topic that should be out shortly. Folks, I wrote about the phenomenon that led to the death of Charlie Kirk in my two previous books. One's called Prowess, The Man You Were Meant to Be. And the most recent one is called Death of Civilization. When I released Death of Civilization, I told people, this is what I see coming in the next 4 years. And I laid out a rise in politically motivated violence, persecution, wars and rumors of wars. And I said, I hope I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong on this and for people to ridicule me for writing this book because I was such a, chicken little running around saying the sky is falling. Unfortunately, folks, it's coming true. All the things that I warned about in this book, Death of Civilization, are coming true. The second half of that book detailed some things that we can do about this. And really, I can sum it all up in one word: relationships. We need to foster better, more, stronger, better relationships than what we currently have. We need to be more intentional about building and maintaining relationships with our community, with our neighbors, and with our families. If we don't do that, folks, we're only going to see more of this. And going back to church, Charlie Kirk being the impetus for hundreds of thousands of people to go back to church that had not been in years, or to go to church for the first time, to pick up a Bible and to be amazed when they open it up and it says, the truth will set you free. That that's incredible. It's incredible. So what I'm saying about this is that we should not be surprised, but we should take it to heart. We should pray for our nation. We should work together and form relationships and foster those relationships to try to make our nation stronger, because our nation is built of families, communities are built of families. All right, so I imagine there are a few questions and comments I need to get to. Is somebody here? Oh, okay. Here. I thought I heard somebody come in the door back there. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a home invasion. That'd be great. Get my home invaded live on YouTube. That'd be great. Um, Country Boy 316 asks, how do we transition kids away from video games? Well, if you control the screens, if you paid for them, then you take them away. You turn them off. One thing that I don't understand is that people are afraid to have any conflict whatsoever with their own children. Your job as a parent is to be the brick wall that your kids run into when they try to do something stupid. And that means you've got to be strong enough. You've got to be stronger than they are. So if your kids are setting the agenda, you are wrong. You're being weak. You're being cowardly. You have to be willing to stand up to your own children and to tell them you're not going to do this anymore because it is bad for you. It is wrong. Anymore, what would you do if you walked in and they were smoking dope, or if you walked in and they were, drinking a beer and they're 9 years old? Are you going to go, well, I don't want to make them mad at me, so I'm not going to say anything. Allowing your young kids unfettered access to screens is no different than putting Coca-Cola into your baby's bottle. It might not kill them, but it certainly is not good for them. And it makes you a bad parent. If you want to be a good parent, you got to stop trying to be your kid's best friend and start being their mentor. Walter Kaminsky's asking something about Ukrainian airspace. We'll have to deal with that on a different one. Unique Me says, what is the purpose of trans in our society? My husband says virus. Well, no, everything evil leads to death, and everything the left advocates for is evil. What I mean is, if you just look at all the positions that are taken by the left, euthanasia, people ought to be able to commit suicide if they want to, and we should help them. Abortion, we should be able to murder our babies in the womb, or maybe it's shortly after they leave the womb. The homosexual agenda, you're not having any babies. The trans agenda, you're not having any babies. The environmental agenda, you're not having any babies because they're little, they're wasting too much carbon or whatever. All of the things that they do point to death, and anything that points to death is evil. Point, period, end of story. That's it. Carlos St. Croix says he has no gun leaving roof. How did the gun magically get in the woods? It's a very good question, Carlos. I wonder if perhaps he dropped the weapon off the roof, then went and jumped down, then went and retrieved it. And that didn't happen in that video of him jumping down off the roof. Okay. That's the only thing I can think of. That he must have tossed the weapon off the roof when he was done with it, jumped down, grabbed the weapon, ran off. Okay. That's my guess. Orlando, hey Orlando, I remember you. I remember years ago at Darcy, you said America was going to change drastically in about 5 years, and sure enough, everything changed. Wondered what did he know? Orlando, I miss you, man. Um, a very, very impressive young man from New York. I hope you and Nakia are doing well. Nicole Angel says, Chuck, how can you continue a relationship with a family member that was one of the ones happy about his death? Well, I think if they can be vocal about it, look, it's a free country. Everybody's welcome to their opinion. And I do not agree with the push to cancel everybody who expresses an opinion that's gross and abhorrent about the murder of Charlie Kirk. Um, I don't think that people should be getting fired or anything like that unless they are representing a company. If I'm the owner of a company, you represent me, and you're saying this, something that I find reprehensible, then okay. Then if I should have the freedom to fire you if I want to. But I don't know that the world, that the whole country should be trying to force people to get fired. I think if you have a family member who was happy about his death, well, they have the freedom to say so, but you should have the freedom to say so as well, what you think. And I think you should have the freedom to say that is gross and abhorrent and disgusting, and let the chips fall where they may. Dennis says, do you think that doing your time in the Army prepared you for college and enabled you to resist their indoctrination? Absolutely, 100%. I remember many times when I was in college listening to the professor say something absolutely stupid, and I would just stand up and say, I'm sorry, that is a stupid thing to say. Or I would go down to the front and talk to the instructor afterwards and say, I'm paying you to teach me economics. I'm not paying you to teach me about your political bent. So I'll appreciate it if you'll just stick to economics in the future. It didn't endear me to my professors very much, but I had just come out of combat. And so I wasn't in the least bit, you know, afraid of my professors, uh, or intimidated by my professors, which some of my other classmates probably were because they hadn't just been getting shot at. MW says if the assassin had to jump off the roof, how did he get on the roof? I'm thinking maybe he went up a stairwell and just didn't want to run back through the building. That's my guess. Pam Dolson says, has it been confirmed that the rifle they found was the actual weapon? I believe so. Um, at least they say that the shooter left messages with his transgender roommate that said that that was the weapon that he used and that he needed to go back and retrieve it from the bush that he hid it in the woods where it was found. Uh, Scott SV Jackal said, did the shooter not have a duffel bag looking thing? Yeah, he had some kind of bag. I'm not sure what that was. Antonia says, why didn't the police check the rooftops? Didn't we learn anything since the Trump assassination attempts? They may have checked the rooftops before the event. The problem was this kid managed to get out on the rooftop during the event. And he could have run out there, taken a prone position, and taken that shot in less than 60 seconds. So it's not like he was laid up there for the entire event just waiting. Otherwise, he would have been seen. It's likely that he just was hiding inside in the stairwell, going up to the roof, waited until the event was underway, and moved out onto the rooftop, took a prone position, took the shot, and then ran off. That's likely what happened. I don't know for sure. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. We're well over an hour. So I'm going to end it here, but I really appreciate all of you. And I hope that you will go over to chuckholton.com and, support us over there. It is very meaningful to me when those of you who do support us put your money where your mouth is and say, I'm willing to toss you $9 a month to keep bringing us this content, because it enables me to do this without the worry about having to go out and, please my masters at CBN or Newsmax or whatever. So thank you very much for those of you who support us over at chuckholton.com. I would encourage you to go take a look at our upcoming trip to Armenia. Charlie Kirk was supposed to go to Armenia. He had accepted an invitation to go there by Jacob Persley. And um, Armenia is an amazing country. So we're going to do a tour there next June, and I would welcome all of you who want to go. We have a few slots left for that trip. So you can find out more about that at chuckholton.com or at holtonnews.com as well. So God bless you. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate all of you. And we